Deep core activation for strength training during pregnancy. This is going to be one of the more important concepts that we go through. You are going to use this concept in literally probably every single exercise that you're doing. First, I want to bring to your attention the concept of tension to task before we go through exactly what it means and what it looks like to activate your deep core. Tension to task means that we use the appropriate amount of tension for the task at hand. For instance, if I go to lift up a water bottle, okay? If I lift up a water bottle, that's gonna be next to no effort for me. I don't really need to squeeze my bicep or try really hard to lift up the water bottle. Now, if I go to lift up a case of water by the handle, I'm gonna have to try pretty hard, or if I am trying to lift up a 5-gallon bucket of water, I'm gonna have to try a lot harder with that task than I would with just a singular water bottle. So I want you to remember that when we are doing this deep core activation, you do not need to maximally contract your deep core with every single thing you're doing. Please don't do that. It's not meant to work that way, okay? When you are doing something that is harder, so let's say you are doing a little more challenging weight for you in a hinge pattern, or you are doing a pull up, or you are doing, again, something that requires substantial amount of effort on your part, that would be a good time to really recruit more of your deep core, have a little bit more of that maximal type effort. But if you are just doing a single leg bridge, for instance, on the ground, you don't need a maximal contraction of your deep core to do a single leg bridge. Light connection is great. So I want you to keep in mind, as we're going through all of these exercises, it's really going to be up to you to decide the amount of contraction that you need. Again, tension to task is really important. Your deep core is an anticipatory muscle. That means that before you make a movement, your deep core starts to turn on and prime your body to stabilize everything for you to make that movement. We are going to be consciously recruiting it a bit more to provide some stability as well as training for our abdominals during pregnancy. But again, we don't need to recruit it maximally for every single task that we're doing. We can call deep core activation a couple of different things. We can just call it deep core, or we can call it hugging the baby. What we want to think about when we are recruiting our deep core is that the muscle fibers of the transverse abdominis, and that is the layer I am referring to as your deep core, the transverse abdominis muscle, those fibers run transverse. That means when these fibers contract, they act much like a belt does. So when you cinch down a belt, it gets tighter. That's the same thing that happens with your transverse abdominis muscles. So as we contract, the belly goes from a little more extended to inward. The belly doesn't go up. So it's not a sucking in up here. The ribs are not going to become more pronounced. Also, the pelvis does not need to move forward. There is no part of your transverse abdominal musculature that is making your glutes contract. So when we're trying to get a deep core contraction, we don't need to squeeze our glutes. Our glutes have really no part in getting a deep core contraction. What we want to remember when we are getting this deep core contraction is that we should feel it a lot in this lower part of our abdomen. So right here, here are my hip bones, or my ASIS, and the first thing I want to be able to think about is getting this lower part of my abdomen to pull away from my fingers. I love using this during pregnancy because it's a great tactile way to understand if you are appropriately engaging your deep core. And these are your lower TA fibers down here. So I can put my pinkies on top of my pubic bone. That's going to be about right here. And then just kind of let my hands fall on top of my abdomen from there. I really like doing this in standing versus sitting or laying down. because it's going to give you a little bit better feedback, in my opinion. So we've got our pinkies on our pubic bone, that's right here, and then we're just gonna let our hands lay across the bottom of our abdomen. I like putting my wrist right on my hip bones, like so. Now you're gonna completely relax your belly, okay? You should feel your belly fill up your hands. We have organs inside of us, so when our belly is completely relaxed, it is probably not completely flat, and that is normal too. So we want to completely relax our belly, and then when we exhale, what I like to think about is drawing these hip bones together. Now your hip bones are not actually going to come together, but it is a cue that helps set the intention to get this muscle to work in isolation. Okay, so on a gentle exhale, and your goal is to create space between your palms, fingers, and low belly. Now, when you exhale, what we don't want to see when we are trying to recruit our deep core is this. A bending down, okay? Your six-pack muscles, your rectus abdominis muscles, they do this. They do flexion. Our TA muscles, they don't do flexion. So on that exhale, again, we don't need to see this. We just want to see drawing in right here. Another thing that is not optimal for us to see during an exhale is even more pushing out, okay? On an exhale, we want to be able to recruit our TA. That is what this is all about. So if you put your hands here and then you exhale and set an intention towards recruiting your deep core muscle, and you feel your belly push out into your hands more, then you know, hey, I've got a little bit more work to do. I really need to synchronize this pattern a bit more. On an inhale, what is going to happen is your core eccentrically lengthens. All that means is that when you hold a little bit of tension in your core on an inhale, it should be able to move out slightly. Again, we want the rib cage to be able to move the most. The core moves some, but the rib cage more so. We'll go through that more in the breathing drills, but knowing that on an inhale, your core will move out some, and then on an exhale, that's when we really want to be able to feel that drawing in and slight movement up. We don't want more pronounced shape of the rib cage on an exhale. On an exhale, the ribs should be coming down, okay? On an exhale, it doesn't need to look like this, and we also don't want to see any of this on an exhale, okay? Those ribs on an exhale, we should be getting our internal obliques and intercostals to really help those ribs settle down. All right, that is your deep core activation. Make sure to practice this. We want to have this on lock. We need this skill really ingrained before you start the strength training movements. You're going to be doing this with the strength training movements, so it's really beneficial to practice this kind of before you get into the bulk of the program. The other thing I will leave you with is that this type of activation of your deep core during pregnancy is literally the perfect example of progressive overload. So if you think about what happens during pregnancy, what gets heavier? Your baby gets heavier during pregnancy. So when we are practicing this deep core activation throughout our pregnancy, by the end of our pregnancy, we could be lifting up an 8-pound baby with our core, versus in the beginning of our pregnancy, we were lifting up something that was super, super tiny. So know that it is extremely beneficial for you to continue to practice this deep core activation throughout your pregnancy, and your deep core can get stronger. Yes, it's going to get stretched out, but you are going to have that muscle memory postpartum of how to activate that layer of your core. All right, hopefully that was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.